The snow had just melted in Middlebury, but Nora Glenn still felt like she was walking through ice as she stepped into her parents' house. The front door creaked at a familiar angle, the brass knob still catching at the turn just like it had in high school. She lingered on the porch for a second longer than she needed to, brushing salt off her coat sleeve, letting the faint clink of the wind chimes above distract her. But inside warmth pulsed from the old radiator in the entryway, and the scent of rosemary ham curled through the air like a memory that didn't belong to her. Nora. Her mother's voice echoed from the kitchen. That you? Nora let the door shut behind her with a click, softer than her breath. Yeah, just got in. No one came to greet her. The living room looked untouched, as if it had been posed for a magazine shoot that never happened. A bouquet of ivory silk flowers sat stiffly on the mantel. On the dining table, wedding pamphlets fanned out beneath Evelyn Glenn's manicured fingers. In here, sweetie, she called again, still not appearing. Can you carry those bakery boxes to the garage freezer? Nora picked up the white cardboard cartons stacked on the hall bench, careful not to tilt the top one where pastel frosting had already left a smudge. Kendra must have chosen the cakes this morning. She always liked raspberry and lemon, sharp sweet things that filled a room before anyone else could speak. In the kitchen, her sister laughed into a phone, one leg tucked beneath her, as she scrolled through a tablet. No mom loves peonies. Hydrangeas make her sneeze, she said, then glanced up, eyes flicking to Nora for half a second. Hi. Sorry, I've been buried in decor details all day. Nora gave a small smile, her hands still full of cake boxes. That's okay. Well, Evelyn said, wiping her hands on a linen towel. At least you're here. Take those out to the freezer, would you? Be careful. They're custom samples. Later during dinner, the dining room hummed with the low chime of silverware and the rhythm of practiced conversations. Kendra held court, discussing color palettes and honeymoon destinations in a lilac silk blouse that shimmered under the chandelier. Evelyn nodded eagerly, offering to call the florist again to confirm garden roses. Mr. Glenn, still in his office slacks, contributed nods and the occasional, sounds like a good plan. Nora sat 2 seats down across from the chair that used to be hers before she left for college. She spooned roasted carrots onto her plate, then pushed them to one side, unnoticed. I was thinking of live music during the cocktail hour, Kendra said between bites. String quartet, maybe, or jazz trio. Evelyn clapped softly. Oh, I love that. You've always had such a polished taste. Nora cleared her throat gently. I, helped book a jazz series for the community center last month. There's a trio from Roxbury. That's lovely, dear, her father said, though his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Pass the mustard. She passed it without a word. After dinner, while the dishwasher hummed, and Kendra FaceTimed her fiancé upstairs, Nora slipped on her coat and stepped out into the back garden. The air was damp with melt, the soil giving just slightly under her boots. The porch light spilled a crooked beam across the path. Evening came a voice from the fence. Mr. Hawley leaned on the gatepost, his brown cardigan buttoned unevenly, and a steaming mug in one hand. Evening, Mr. Hawley, his old retriever. Daisy lifted her head briefly and gave a soft huff before curling back beneath the porch step. Snow's melting fast, he said, but it always leaves behind what winter hid. Nora tilted her head, half smiling. Guess we're about to find out. They stood in quiet for a few more moments, the scent of old cedar and roast ham drifting faintly from the kitchen window. Back in the guest room, her old room, though the posters were gone and the books reduced to a single forgotten shelf, Nora sat at the desk, The wood still bore the faint scratch where she'd once dropped a mug full of highlighters during exam week. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed weakly against the encroaching dusk. The grant draft blinked back at her. Proposal for New Horizons Community Resource Hub. She skimmed her edits, adjusted a figure in the budget column, then paused. Someone has to care! The words came out as a whisper, barely louder than the radiator's soft hiss. She didn't expect anyone to hear it. Not in this house. She folded the grant proposal into a battered manila envelope, along with a letter she hasn't mailed yet. The small church basement smelled of instant coffee and floor wax, but to Nora, it was the scent of purpose. She adjusted the stack of handouts on the folding table, glancing once more at the pie chart she'd drawn on the whiteboard. It had taken 3 rewrites and a brief existential crisis over whether grocery analogies were patronizing, but she'd settled on clarity over cleverness. She didn't want to impress. She wanted to reach. The room was already half full. Seniors filtered in with the easy rhythm of Saturday routine, coats shrugged off polite hellos, a shuffle of metal chairs, a plate of warm blueberry muffins baked by someone's granddaughter, just because, sat on a side table near the coffee urn. Nora offered a smile to each attendee as they took a seat. Today, she began, voice steady but not loud. We're going to talk about credit scores, not as some mysterious number in the sky, but like a recipe. Flour, sugar, baking powder. Each part matters. A quiet chuckle rippled through the group. One woman in a lavender cardigan tapped her notepad. So, if I forget the flour, that's like missing a payment. Exactly, Nora said, smiling. And if you pay everything on time but max out your credit cards, that's like adding too much salt. It overwhelms the rest. In the back row, a woman, Nora hadn't noticed before, raised a single eyebrow, half amused. She wore a moss-green knit scarf, looped artfully over a cream sweater, and gold earrings shaped like tiny compass roses. Her gaze wasn't casual, it was studying, measuring without judgment. Nora clicked to the next slide, detailing how payment history and credit utilization made up 2/3 of the score. She used a grocery list to illustrate priorities. The room leaned in, not out of confusion, but the kind of interest that comes when someone finally puts your language on the page. After the session, people trickled out in 2s and 3s, murmuring thanks and asking if next week might cover online fraud. Nora stayed to erase the board, tucking chalk-dusted fingers into the back pocket of her faded jeans.
You have a gift,
the woman in the green scarf said, appearing beside her, like mist. Nora straightened. Oh, I hope it wasn't too basic. I wasn't sure how much financial vocabulary. No, the woman interrupted gently. Your tone.
You teach like someone who's been there.
Nora blinked. Thank you. I'm Raina, the woman said, offering her hand. Rena Walcott. I came because Mr. Hawley mentioned the sessions at the co-op. I didn't know he'd spread the word.
He doesn't say much,
Rena said, but he says enough. She held up a waxed paper square lemon bar. Nora accepted it, savoring the sharp citrus the way it cut through the church basement air. They moved to the far corner near the window where light filtered through stained glass, just enough to tint the dust motes. I taught workshops too, Rena said. Years ago. Financial literacy for women's shelters. Still do guest consults sometimes, but I've been told. I'm semi-retired now. Nora tilted her head. That sounds like the best kind of retired. Raina laughed low and warm.
If you're free next weekend, come to my place for lunch. I promise not to bring pie charts.
Nora hesitated. She didn't do social lunches. Not since college. Not since she learned how much easier it was to be useful than seen. But Raina's eyes held no pressure. Just an open door.
I'd like that,
Nora said. As they stepped outside, the faint notes of a gospel choir floated down from the sanctuary above. The harmonies caught in the crisp spring air, wrapping around them like a hymn remembered from childhood. Mr. Hawley stood near the front steps, Daisy trotting beside him. He tipped his cap.
"Quite the turnout today,"
he said. "Mr. Hawley." Rena greeted with a nod. "You still walk the long block every morning, doctor's orders," he replied, eyes twinkling. Then to Nora. "She's the real deal, that." Rena. Lost her husband a decade ago. Never lost her spark. Nora looked at Rena again, her scarf fluttering in the wind like a quiet declaration. She smiled, nodded goodbye, and walked the 3 blocks back to her apartment with a warmth in her chest that wasn't from the lemon bar. That night, after folding laundry and setting tea, to steep. Her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. "Bring nothing but your stories." The scent of mint and roasted carrots lingered in the air as Nora stepped into Rena's sunlit kitchen. The wide planked floor creaked softly under her feet as she crossed the threshold. A breeze stirred the linen curtain by the sink, carrying in the faint scent of hyacinths and just-mown grass. The kitchen felt lived in, but not worn. Copper pots glinted above the stove, and a record played somewhere in the next room. Trumpet and piano in a slow, warm dance. "You found it," Rena called from the hallway, voice lighter than usual. She emerged with a basket of folded napkins and a laugh in her eyes. "That GPS always insists I live 3 houses to the left." "It tried," Nora admitted. "But the mailbox with the painted hummingbirds gave you away." Rena smiled and gestured toward the table. 2 mismatched placemats waited, one embroidered with lemons, the other a faded red and white check. Between them, a vase of tulips leaned toward the sun. As they settled in, Rena slid a baking dish from the oven, its golden top bubbling at the edges. "Roasted carrot tart," she said, "and a side of opinionated salad." "Opinionated?" Nora asked, raising a brow.
"It talks back,"
Rena replied, tossing a mix of arugula and mint with vinaigrette.
"But only if you're polite."
Nora laughed. It felt easy, the kind that lived behind ribs and only came out when no one was watching. They ate slowly. Conversation wandered. Rena shared how she'd built her investment firm in the late 80s, refusing to trade on the backs of people she couldn't look in the eye. Impact wasn't a buzzword, then she said. It was just decency. She talked about Paul, her husband, of 27 years, who'd passed from ALS. There was no tremble in her voice, only reverence. "He never let me make his decisions for him. Even when he lost the strength to write, he blinked, yes or no, like it was Morse code." A framed photo on the shelf above the piano caught Nora's eye. A man in uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, one arm around Rena's waist. They were laughing. His tie was crooked, her lipstick slightly smudged. "I never imagined restarting," Rena said, following her gaze. "But then there was the workshop and the first young woman who stayed after class just to talk. And now there's you." Nora set her fork down. "I don't usually tell people much, I noticed." "It's not that I don't want to," she added, glancing at the lemon check placemat. "It's just I've spent a lot of time being told what I should want. College A steady job. Something respectable." "But respectability doesn't pay down student debt or make you feel like you matter." Rena reached over and poured 2 cups of chamomile tea, the steam curling into the sunlight. "I teach money with soul," she said softly, "because numbers without people are just noise." They drank in companionable silence for a few moments. Chairman Meow. Reina's large, aloof cat padded through the doorway. Tail high, he leapt onto a bench and regarded Nora like an appraiser.
You'd like... Drew.
Reina said suddenly, sipping her tea. Doesn't waste words or time. Nora looked up. Your son! My godson, former Navy! Now tech finance! Wild mix! I know! She stood and rummaged in a drawer. I meant to give you this. Wrapped in a square of floral fabric was a set of vintage pencils, each bearing a quote in delicate serif print. Compound. Interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Money is a terrible master, but an excellent servant. Start where you are. Use what you have. Nora turned one over in her fingers, the wood smooth and slightly worn. These are beautiful. They were. Paul's, Reina said, but he'd want someone to use them. Later, as Reina rinsed dishes and Chairman Meow snoozed on the windowsill, Nora tore a sticky note from the pad she kept in her bag. She paused, then wrote, Nora Glenn Community Builder. She stuck it onto the inside flap of her notebook, heart thudding gently in her chest. Not from nerves, but something quieter, a beginning. By the time she got home, her inbox chimed. Reina had emailed her a single line and a calendar invite. Speaking at a panel in Boston next month. Just come to listen, unless you'd like to do more. The Boston Convention Center buzzed with lanyards, coffee carts, and quiet ambition. Umbrellas clustered at the entryway, like tired sentries, dripping puddles onto the gray industrial carpet. Nora stepped past them, smoothing the lapel of her navy blazer, with one hand, the other gripping a program folded neatly in half. Rain tapped steadily against the glass atrium above, soft but insistent. Inside, the air smelled of espresso, toner ink, and something sharper expectation. She paused near the back of the main hall. A low murmur drifted from the stage, where Reina was already mid-sentence, poised in a teal blazer that set off her silver-streaked hair. The backdrop behind her read Financial Empowerment Summit, Building Equitable Futures. Beside her sat two men in tailored suits and a woman in burgundy pumps tapping notes into a tablet. Nora slid into an empty seat near the aisle. Her recycled paper program bore tidy marginalia. Already she'd underlined inclusive capital and drawn a tiny question mark next to social return algorithms. She sipped lukewarm hotel coffee and listened. Reina's voice carried with an ease that filled the hall without needing to rise. Financial dignity isn't just a phrase, Reina was saying. It's the difference between options and survival, between a voice that gets heard and one that gets filed away. Applause broke out as the panel wrapped. Nora exhaled, then stood to help direct audience members toward the Q&A breakout space. A woman in a bright head wrap leaned in with a question about microloans. A retired city planner mentioned generational wealth gaps in small towns. Nora listened, took notes, offered gentle gestures toward the microphone queue. Good instincts, Reina murmured behind her. Nora turned startled. Just trying not to block the camera crew. You see, what needs attention without shouting, Reina said. That's rarer than it should be. They moved to the side of the hallway, where glass windows looked out over a damp city street, streaked with taxi headlights. People passed in clusters, badges swinging takeaway biscotti, crumbling in napkins. Reina scanned the crowd, then lifted a hand. Drew, she called. 1 minute. A man in a charcoal suit with rain-damp curls and wire-rimmed glasses turned. Late 30s, perhaps, with the kind of posture that came not from arrogance but long habit. His eyes were quiet, curious but not unreadable. This is Nora Glenn, Reina said simply. She teaches money with soul. You two should talk sometime. Drew nodded once, then offered a handshake that was brief but firm. I've got 15 minutes and a suspicious biscotti, he said. You want to walk? They found a bench by a corner coffee cart. Nora balanced her cup on the metal railing, while Drew folded the summit brochure and tucked it into his coat. What do you teach? He asked. Basics, she said. Budgeting, debt, literacy, trust. He tilted his head slightly. It's not just numbers, Nora added. It's about why people avoid eye contact when you mention bank accounts. About systems that don't listen until people shout and even then pretend not to hear. Drew nodded, slow and steady. Most of what we do at Atherton feels like sandbags against a flood. You're describing the source. I'm describing the silence, she said, and why people stop asking for help. They sat a while longer. Someone walked by with a tray of cookies. A woman with a squeaky suitcase asked for directions to room D. Somewhere nearby, a barista called out latte for Lucas, with the authority of someone used to being ignored, when the wind changed direction and rain misted against the window beside them. Drew stood.
We need that perspective at the table.
Nora looked up. What table? He didn't elaborate, just pulled out a slim notebook and scribbled something quickly, then tore off the page. That's me, he said. Check your email tonight. Later, back at her borrowed room in a friend's Beacon Hill apartment. Nora sat cross-legged on the bed with her laptop. Her fingers hesitated before opening her inbox. There it was. Subject Pilot Advisory Group Body. Would you join an advisory pilot we're building? Community First Lens. Your experience matters. Day. She stared at the screen. It was unsigned, except DA. The ballroom shimmered with fairy lights and gold-rimmed place cards, and not a trace of Nora. Servers in starched white shirts moved like synchronized dancers, balancing trays of goat cheese crostini and strawberry mocktails. The hall, grand and echoing, pulsed with a kind of curated joy, carefully lit, carefully framed. A photo booth in the corner flashed every few seconds, spitting out strips of grinning faces with paper crowns and glittery signs. Somewhere near the main stage, a string quartet glided through canon in D, their instruments polished to near blindness. Nora stood near the side of the room, adjusting the sleeve of her emerald dress and nursing a cup of lukewarm tea. It was the only thing she could find that hadn't been claimed or poured into flutes. A waiter brushed past, and for the third time that hour, someone handed her an empty glass, mistaking her for staff. She didn't correct them. Kendra entered like a meteor gown, shimmering veil, trailing like smoke. Her entrance alone silenced a dozen conversations. She smiled with her teeth and twirled at just the right speed. Nora watched from behind a tall potted fern near the catering table. The last time she stood in a room with this many people, she'd been explaining inflation-adjusted income to a group of retirees in a musty basement. That room had smelled like lemon muffins and learning. This one smelled like roses and performance. Evelyn and Mr. Glenn were glowing nearly incandescent. They moved from table to table, accepting congratulations as if they'd orchestrated the whole ceremony with divine precision. Their voices carried above the music, something about the 6-tiered cake, the out-of-state florist, the way Kendra had always been born. For moments like these, Nora stepped back toward the shadow of the hallway where the kitchen doors swung open rhythmically. She needed a breath of air, not soaked in perfume and champagne. Nora, a voice rasped behind her. She turned. Mr. Hawley stood there in a well-worn suit, his tie slightly askew. His cane tapped gently against the parquet floor.
Heard you were featured in local Impact Weekly,
he said, voice low but proud.
Front page, no less.
Oh, she said, blinking. That was just about the budgeting class, the one that saved Doris Callahan from losing her house, he said. I'd call that newsworthy." She smiled softly, and for the first time all evening, it felt genuine. They were joined a moment later by Ms. Graham, the retired librarian with a fondness for brooches shaped like books. "We used your article in the adult reading club," she said, adjusting her shawl. "Sparked quite the conversation on ethics in retirement planning." Nora's parents were passing nearby. Just then, Evelyn mid-sentence about the imported table linens. She paused. "What article?" she asked. Ms. Graham turned. "Didn't you see Nora's piece in Local Impact? Beautiful work, sharp but kind, like good teaching always is." Mr. Glenn's smile wavered. Evelyn blinked too quickly. Kendra, meanwhile, stood across the room, posing with the groom's extended cousins, and then, as if someone had pulled a thread loose from the hem of the night, everything shifted. A man in a navy pinstripe suit approached, clean-shaven with an air of practiced ease. He extended his hand toward Nora. "Carlton." "Hayes," he said. "Former aide to Mayor Lewison. Drew speaks highly of you." The air thinned. Conversations around them stalled like someone had gently pressed pause on the wedding reel. Nora shook his hand. "We've just started a project," she said. "Early days." Carlton nodded, smiling. "Early's when the foundation matters most." When he left the room resumed its glittery hum. But Evelyn was quieter now. Mr. Glenn looked toward the band as though trying to find a distraction.
"And Kendra."
She glanced back across the ballroom, eyes scanning past the stage, the champagne tower, the guests, with choreographed toasts. Her gaze found Nora still by the fern, now chatting with Miss Graham. A tight smile curved her lips. It didn't quite reach her eyes, maybe not quite as victorious as she thought. The chapel was barely half full, but the joy filled every inch. Rain tapped lightly on the stained glass windows. A steady hush that softened the edges of the world. Inside, candles flickered in brass sconces, their glow warming the ivy-covered stone walls. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, just a piano, a stand-up bass, and a trumpet with a velvet mute. There were no ushers, no assigned seating, and no flower girl scattering petals. Only handwritten programs resting on each pew, the ink slightly smudged from the damp air. Nora stood in the small anteroom, her hands steady as she adjusted the neckline of her simple ivory dress. No veil, no bustle, just clean lines and a soft ribbon at the waist. She caught her reflection in the mirror above a chipped sink and allowed herself one long, measured breath. Behind her, Rena gently cleared her throat. "You're sure you don't want me to walk with you?" Nora smiled. "No, I want to meet him as myself. Not escorted, not delivered." Rena's scarf, that same mossy green one Nora had admired months ago, was draped across her shoulders now. It looked like it belonged there, settled earned. The chapel door opened without fanfare. Nora stepped in. Alone, each step quiet against the polished stone floor. Heads turned slowly. Rena watched with a proud, unsentimental gaze. Mr. Hawley offered her a subtle nod, his cane leaning beside him. Evelyn and Mr. Glenn sat in the third pew, both upright, unusually still. Drew waited at the front, dressed not in a tuxedo but a charcoal suit and a soft smile that didn't falter. When their eyes met, it wasn't a cinematic moment, not fireworks but something gentler, certain. True Rena stepped forward and read a poem, not from a script, but from memory. It spoke of rivers and resilience, of kindness, uncounted of names, whispered with reverence. Then Drew took Nora's hands in his. "I don't remember what you wore the first time we met," he began. "But I remember how the room listened differently after you spoke. kindness changed that room. Changed me. Nora's voice was steady. I never needed to be seen, but I've never felt more visible than now. There were no bridesmaids, no officiant with booming declarations, just a quiet circle of witnesses who mattered. When it was done, when the vows were spoken, and the rings exchanged, someone clapped. Then another, then all. At the modest reception under a canvas awning, outside paper lanterns bobbed in the breeze. The scent of clove and vanilla drifted from small votives arranged among bowls of sugared almonds. Instead of party favors, each guest received a slim bookmark with the same quote handwritten in cursive. Give without needing to be remembered. Nora moved through the gathering slowly. There were no grand speeches, only laughter over coffee and stories passed like folded napkins. Evelyn found her by the tea station alone for a moment. I used to think quiet meant unsure, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you were always more than we knew. I'm sorry we didn't see it. Nora nodded. Once. I'm glad you're here. No grudge, no drama. Just the kind of forgiveness that doesn't need to be announced. Later, as the sky dimmed to a soft navy and the jazz trio wound down their final song, Mr. Hawley raised a modest paper cup. To the girl who gave quietly and still got the world. Drew laughed, his hand resting lightly on Nora's back, and even Rena's eyes shimmered briefly behind her glasses. Weeks later, each guest would receive a note in Nora's handwriting, short and specific. Gratitude not for attendance, but for the role they'd played in making her life feel full. Not loud, not flashy, just full. Even in a chapel half filled, love had a way of settling into every corner, quietly claiming its place. Nora's journey wasn't marked by fanfare or approval, but by grace that grew in silence and kindness that needed no spotlight. Sometimes the most enduring change begins, not with declarations, but with a quiet yes, heard only by those who truly listen, like the soft glow of a porch light on a snowy night. Quiet, goodness often guides us home before we even know we were lost. If this story found you, perhaps it's time to notice the gentle strengths around you, and maybe offer your own.